Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. Hello and welcome to our May Book Club episode. This month we invited you to join us in reading Celestial Lights by Cecile Pinn. Celestial Lights tells the story of Oliver Innes, one of the most renowned astronauts of his time, on a 10-year mission to Europa, a distant moon. As his time in space increases, Ollie reflects back on his past, his childhood in his glow-in-the-dark space-themed bedroom, a summer spent searching for cicadas with his childhood friend, and later in life his time at university, and even later becoming a husband and father. This novel is a breathtaking and compelling story of ambition, fate and sacrifice. And if you haven't already read this amazing book, a link to grab yourselves a copy will be in the show notes, and I will try and keep this episode as spoiler-free as possible. Author of Celestial Lights, Cecile Pinn is a London-based writer. Her debut novel, Wandering Souls, was published in 2023 to much acclaim. It was published in 12 languages, longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, the Prix Féminin Étranger, and shortlisted for the Waterstones Debut Fiction Prize. Cecile has won the Fragonard Prize for Foreign Literature, a Somerset Maugham Award, and a London Writers' Award. In 2025, she was selected as one of Forbes 30 Under 30 Europe, and here to discuss her second novel, Celestial Lights, with me. Welcome, Cecile, to A Pair of Bookends.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. I am aware that I probably butchered the pronunciation of most of those awards, but congratulations on all your success. It's been so wonderful to see, and I was so excited that I got to have you on the podcast. Before we dive into your book, though, I do like to start by asking what you're currently reading.
Thank you. Yeah, at the moment I'm enjoying reading kind of classics. I just finished reading The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov,
Amazing.
and I'm reading Revolutionary Road right now by Richard Yates, which is as great as everyone told me it would be.
I mean, I haven't read the book, but that film blew me away. I don't know
Mhm.
if it's a good adaptation because obviously I haven't read the book, but the film was beautiful. So I very
Mhm.
much want to read that at some point. But let's get into your book. Had you always wanted to write a space novel?
I think I did. Yeah, I remember pitching it to my agent and my editor before when they were kind of in the process of acquiring Wandering Souls. I told them, just so you know, my next novel is going to be quite different. I want it to be kind of space novel. I think I've always been interested in the celestial. I was never really good at physics or things like that, but I like a lot of people. I think I did have this fascination with everything kind of universe themed, and I think there's something so mysterious yet all
Mhm.
encompassing about the cosmos, down to the fact that our bones are made of stardust, but there's also so much we don't know about it. It's so dangerous, and I think to write about it provides almost like a blank slate. So it was very tempting, and also I think my first book was so personal in lots of ways. It was based on a family history, and I was there was something tempting as well about writing a book that looked a bit more towards the future, and that, as I said, was a bit more of like a blank slate as well.
And did you realize when you were writing it that you'd be releasing it around the perfect time when everyone was so invested in space travel?
No, I mean, I kind of knew this moon mission, the Artemis mission was happening, but it kept moving date. My novel kept moving date, so it's like, I didn't think that they would happen at the same time, but then it all worked out.
Perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Your opening line of this novel is, I was born the day Challenger fell out of the sky, and I was born blue. At least that is what I was told. And I'm curious how much you previously knew about specific space missions like Challenger prior to writing this, or was a lot of it, a lot of research when you were writing this?
Yeah, I knew about the Challenger mission. It happened a bit before I was born, but I remember like learning about it as a kid and always finding it so sad. And there was something about it that really stayed with me, knowing that there was a teacher on board and that a lot of her school children, her family were watching the mission live, and how such a kind of joyful, hopeful moment turned into such a tragedy so
Mm.
quickly. So I knew quite early on that I wanted the mission and Ollie to be linked somehow. And at first, had Ollie watching the mission on telly, but there was something a bit flat about writing about a character watching something on TV. And then So then I had the idea of having him be born at the same time. And that first sentence came to me like as I was changing my bed sheets, actually, like very randomly. But I think, and then it meant that Ollie was born in 86, and then the timeline kind of worked because it meant that he would come of age during the financial crisis. And yeah, so the timeline was quite good in that way. So I knew there was definitely a lot of research that I had to do, even though I knew a little bit about the shuttle mission and all these things. Still a lot of research.
I mean, the financial crisis aspect is an important one, isn't it? Because that sort of leads him on this path to seeking out the Navy. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how he finds himself on the path that he ends up on?
So I think with Ollie, I wanted to write him as a character that, a lot of the narration is him reflecting on his life and him almost trying to justify some of his action in some ways. So
Hmm.
you're never, and I wanted him to be a character that I knew some people would love and some people would dislike. And so he attends University in London, becomes an engineering student, and basically has this decision once his studies are done on which path to undertake. And he, as I said, comes of age during the financial crisis, and so the job market is limited, and so he kind of says, "Well, I decided to join the Navy." It was also during the time of the Iraq War, both because as an engineering student, the Navy offered some really good opportunities, and
Hmm.
also, you know. He was able to travel the world. He joins as a submariners, working on a submarine, or like, which is something that I would never do. It's like spending 3 months at a time under the sea with very limited contact with the surface. But so, and I think there's this question of we never know exactly how much in control of his choices he is, or if it really was because of the financial crisis and because he felt like his options were limited that he decided to join the Navy. But then, of course, he also admits that joining the Navy and having this experience with nuclear reactors, with science, technology, and those kind of very, hard environments is also what propelled his career to then join Novatech, the space agency, ends up joining, and then to become commander of this 10-year-long mission as well.
I mean, throughout the book, he mentions this sort of feeling of being out of place, doesn't he? And
Mhm.
feeling separate to kind of everyone else. And this is sort of at university, his flatmates go out without him, and when he first joins the Navy, he has to make a conscious effort to kind of join in with his sort of, are they called like crewmates? I don't know, like part of his crew.
Yeah.
He has to make a
Mhm.
conscious effort to kind of join them in the sort of socializing room. And in a memory of Philly and him as children, he says, I recognized in her loneliness something of my own. I wondered what you think it is that sort of stirs these feelings of loneliness within him.
Yeah, I think Ollie, he's an only child.
Hmm.
He's a dreamer. I think a lot of the time, a lot of his time spent as a child is him kind of, playing with his superhero figurines, like imagining scenarios in his head and spending time on his own. And I think at university, his introversion can come up as aloofness as well.
Yeah.
And he's quite an ambitious character as well. And I think his university years is him trying to kind of realize that and come to terms with the fact that he is ambitious in some ways and trying to find how much space those ambitions should take in his life, if that makes sense. Again, I'm trying to keep the conversation spoiler free. Yeah, then all of a sudden when he's in the Navy, he finds himself in a submarine with like 100 other crewmates for companionship, and that's such a shift, right? And it's him
Yeah.
having to be social kind of for the first time in his life, being put in this situation that's so out of his comfort zone,
Mhm.
or trying to like hack it in some ways, and because he realizes that that's the way that he's going to be able to move forward and kind of survive in some ways the situation is by taking that step and learning how to adapt. And I think he is someone who's always willing to adapt based on the situation in order to advance as well.
Yeah, and I mean his upbringing is a really interesting one because he did only kind of grow up. Does he says at one point something like he was a, does he say he's a big fish in a small pond?
Yes, he does.
Yes,
Yes.
because he's grown up in this village and there's not many sort of prospects for people within this village because it's so sort of self-contained, and he finds that he's really wanting to move away from that, and at one point he says, I wanted to be in a place empty of anyone able to show me my reflection so that I could forge it myself. Why do you think he's so sort of desperate to escape his home.
I think that's something that a lot of us feel as well when you're
Yeah.
18. I mean, I moved away from France when I was 18. I also went to university in London, and I remember when I arrived here, I was like, wow, like no one knows me.
Yeah.
Like I could just lie about who I am if I wanted. I didn't. But there's that moment of you do get that sense, that like dizzying sense of freedom when you're like,
Yeah.
wow, this is again like the side of the blank slate. And having Ollie as someone who is quite ambitious as a kid, who is maybe not always comfortable with who he is, being a kind of awkward, shy, introverted kid, maybe not completely happy with how his childhood went. We don't like there's some hints that maybe he didn't have a lot of friends at school.
Yeah.
He's a bit suffocated, I think, by village life, which is very kind of everyone knows who he is, everybody knows his parents. Yeah, he feels that suffocation and he is keen, I think, to start anew when he's 18 and be with kind of people like him who have those big ambitions and who are kind of curious and engineers like him. And but yeah, I think it's this idea of wanting to start on a blank slate and kind of like reshape your curiosities and like
Mhm.
reshape who you are. And when you're that age and kind of becoming an adult.
There's a moment that really made me laugh that reminded me of myself, and it was when he goes back home at one point, and he's so irritated by people asking him like how he's getting on, and they're just showing curiosity, they're showing interest, they're saying, oh, it's probably really expensive in London, like let us know if you want to come back and do some shifts at the pub, or like we can put you in touch with this person, and he really takes that as like they don't think he can handle it. And it's not that at all. They're just being kind to him. But I think we all do that around that age, don't we?
I think so, yeah. I feel like I've definitely had those moments of, taking everything in a very negative way when you're
Yeah.
like 20, 22. And then I think it's also a time where we're quite like self-centered in some
Yeah.
ways. And we just, we just think that people care much, are much more like nasty about you than actually they're just kind of trying to be nice and, and
Yeah, I
casual
mean,
in some
you're
ways.
just really trying to prove yourself, aren't you? You're like, I
Yeah.
am capable, I can do it, I promise.
Yeah.
But I really want to ask about Ollie's ambition because it's obviously a big theme in this book, and it's an interesting thing because he achieves so much and he's constantly reaching for more, regardless of the sacrifice that might take. And I think it's Oscar Wilde that said, "Ambition is the last refuge of failure." And I wondered if you think that applies to Ollie.
Yeah, I think he is someone who's scared of failure in lots of
Yeah,
ways, and he's someone who's scared of being inadequate as
yeah.
well, lots of the time. And like we see the scene when he's at university where for the first time he finds himself being a bit of a small fish in a big pond, and he doesn't like it. And his way of dealing with that is by like studying harder and trying much harder until he finds himself feeling adequate in the situation. And that's kind of one of his drives, I think, is always being somewhat in control in a room, or at least able to be, in control in
Mhm.
some ways. And so yeah, I definitely think so. And I think that he, I didn't write Ollie as being like a nasty person in some ways.
No.
It was important to me that he was still lovable. And one way of writing a character that's lovable, I think, is by surrounding him as well with lots of kind of lovable people, like
Mhm.
Billy and Shane, his best friend. But I think he is definitely driven by this, I mean, trying to give a sense to his life. And the way that he can give a sense to his life is by always moving forward and achieving those what he thinks are those big things, like, joining the Navy and being top of his class and then kind of becoming an astronaut and joining this like very big mission. I think that's the way that he's found to, it's almost like a kind of a circle, by justifying some of his sacrifices, the bigger the things that he does need to be, because that's the way of justifying the way that he's led his life.
I think he is such a lovable character, and I do think I always talk about ambition because in terms of creative us as creatives, and I'm an actor, so I know a thing or two about being so ambitious and constantly feeling like I need to reach for more because I think like a lot of actors say that you finish one project and you're constantly thinking, oh, I'm never going to work again, and you're constantly reaching for the next thing. And I think that's the same with writers or artists or people of various creative mediums. But this book made me realize that it isn't just the creatives that have that kind of major ambition. Of course it's not. You know, there are many different industries that this will apply to, and there's many different industries that also require a lot of sacrifice from you. And I really loved that you included these like log entries that he makes while he's on this mission, and you can really see him sort of grappling with the choices that he's made and reflecting on that time. So do you want to tell us a little bit about structuring the novel in the way that you did?
Yeah, yeah. And just to go back, it makes me happy that you say that because I think when I was thinking about the novel, I was definitely thinking about like athletes. I was watching documentaries like Free Solo and scientists as well, and
Yeah,
I was watching lots of movies like The Fablemans by Steven Spielberg and like Pain and Glory by Almodovar and Cinema Paradiso, which kind of deals with those different ideas of ambitions
yeah,
and this need of putting your family and your past a bit behind in order to achieve your art or your goals, whether you're like in different industries. So I'm happy that you well felt that way as well when reading the book. But yeah, the structure is still basically the main narration is Ollie during the 10-year long mission to Europa, kind of reflecting on his life and the relationships and the choices that he made that led him to where he is. And as I've said, almost kind of like trying to justifying himself some of his actions and just thinking about them and intercepted throughout the narration or mission logs, which I think give you a different insight into Ollie. They're written in a much more direct way. It's Ollie as the commander of the mission and talking about the daily life of the journey with only three other people for companionship. So it's him, Shane, Lucia, and Dom. So it's just the four of them on this 10-year long trip, unable to contact Earth. And so yeah, I thought it was good to have those logs provide a different side to Ollie's personality, which one that is much less reflective and controlled in some ways. And also the book is partly very loosely based on the Odyssey and this, with this idea of the 10-year long mission and Ollie being the commander and a crew and him leaving his wife and his child behind. And I was interested when reading the Odyssey as well. The structure is quite odd because the things that the Odyssey for, like the Polyphemus, the Cyclops, and the Sirens, and Circe, and all these things, they're actually very condensed, and they're
mm,
not in some lots of ways they're not at the center of the poem, right? They only take like a very small space of it. And I was intrigued by that and interested in doing something a bit similar where the actual action of the novel, the mission, is almost like in the background and it isn't at the center of the story.
I haven't read the Odyssey, so I that was a great insight into it because I'm planning to read it before the film comes out. So, and I've been really scared of going into it.
Well, it's not like as hard as you think. I mean, I read Emily Wilson's translation.
I've heard that's the best one.
It's very, I mean, I'm not like a classicist. I don't speak Greek, so
Yeah,
I don't know. I read a couple of versions afterwards as well to kind of compare, but it's very like accessible,
yeah.
pretty like you can kind of just read it before bed and it's nice.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
Not something too dense. And speaking of dense and something being accessible, I read Project Hail Mary around the time of the release of the film, and I loved the book and I loved the film, but I did find in certain aspects of the book, so some science and space aspects of the book, that it was quite dense in parts, and I just had to let it sort of wash over me and keep moving forward. But with your book, I found those aspects really accessible. And I wondered what the sort of research process was like and whether you were even conscious of wanting to make that accessible or whether it's just the way you wrote it.
Yeah, I think research is always interesting because as a writer, you need to do so much research for
Yeah.
it, for you to feel confident writing the book. And also, I mean, you want the reader to feel like he's in safe hands, but then you don't want to put too much because otherwise it would be a bit boring and yeah, a bit, I think, taking away from the story. So I always think about like an iceberg because there's so much underneath that
Hmm.
people don't end up seeing, but that's there. So I started the novel kind of like Wandering Souls in some ways, which was more historical research, but I just started by having a very, very vague idea of the plot, but just doing research for about 6 months. My alma mater, UCL, allowed me to attend lectures on astrophysics and planetary science. So I did that for a bit, write some books, write some memoirs of astronauts, this book called The Future of Humanity by Michio Kaku as well, that kind of taught me about the challenges that space travel face.
Yeah.
So just learning a lot, and it's through research usually that I come up with the plot. For example, it's during the lectures that I found out about Europa, which I learned is kind of considered the next step after Mars that we want to explore, and it, like one of the places where we think it's most likely we'll find life as well. So yeah, research helps with the plot, but then there also comes a time where I think research becomes procrastination
Yeah,
when you
yeah.
write. So it's good to know when to stop and knowing like you can always go back and do a bit more research when you're writing the details and trying to come up with descriptions, for example. And then finding that balance, I think just is a bit touch and go when it takes a few drafts. I think for me, like I think one of my earlier drafts had a lot about like nuclear fission. Like, and I was like, had to cut that off because I think I'm a teacher's pet as well. So I always want to show that I've done my homework. And
Yeah.
so I think I do end up putting a bit too much at first. And then, yeah, I think it's kind of like your instincts and putting the draft away, then coming back to it and realizing like, oh, actually, we really don't need this. And showing it to a couple of people as well and seeing what they think. But yeah, it's always fun, I think, to do that research as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating. I didn't expect this to be the year that I'd read a couple of space novels and be so completely fascinated by space travel. I couldn't stop thinking, though, whilst I was reading your book, 10 years away from everything with he does, is it, how far into the mission is it that they don't have contact? Is it a couple of years?
I think it's all the missions.
Oh, is it the whole mission?
I think so. Now I'm
Okay.
having doubts, but I
No,
think
no, no.
it's
It's
all the
it's the whole mission,
mission.
but I couldn't even comprehend. I was trying to imagine what that would be like, but it's so hard to comprehend, isn't it? I don't know how he made that choice because so much could and would change. And knowing on your sort of descent back to Earth, I think he has a conversation with Shane or Dom or someone, and they say something like, what are you going to do when we land back if there's been like some kind of apocalypse and it's just us that are there, there's nobody else. And he says to him like, oh, you need to stop watching sci-fi because but it's such a, it's a real concern, if you've been away for that length of time and you wouldn't know what you're coming back to.
Yeah, it is. So the idea is that they can't have contact on Earth because of the material of the spacecraft to
Yes.
protect from radiation. Because as you near Jupiter, there would be lots of radiation harmful to humans. But it's so funny because for me, like, I would never want to do that mission. But then I've talked to a few people, a lot of men actually, and they've said
Yeah,
like, yeah, they've said like, yeah, I would do it, which
of
is so.
course.
Yeah. So I think it is, and again, you hear about, I mean, people doing such hard and jobs and kind of dangerous jobs, which are maybe not exactly like that. Or I mean, submariners, for example, are real and they are cut off from the world for, sometimes 6 months at a time. And
Mhm.
so I think it is something that was interesting to write about because it's not. And I think at the beginning it took me a while to understand Ollie as a person and to really
Yeah.
grasp him as a character. And it's the more time I spent with him and the more, as we said, I realized that actually, well, maybe I wouldn't do that, but like what I do is like spend 2 3 years kind of like locked up trying to write my books and kind of shutting myself in some ways, not to that extent. And I realized that we each have our own kind of thing or dream that we would sacrifice a lot
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
And I think that's when he started becoming, I understood him more as a person when realizing that we were different but had some things in common in some ways. But yeah, I wouldn't want to do
No,
the
no.
mission.
And I will move on from the space aspects in a second, but I just wanted to say how brilliantly you articulated how it must feel for astronauts out in space, on those spacewalks and just being able to see the sort of solar system and its kind of vastness and, looking down at Earth and sort of seeing it as this speck and realizing that, I don't know, that sort of stuff really freaks me out that we are actually just a speck. Not even a speck. We are so small in comparison to like everything else that's out there. Like we have no idea. And I think reading that, I actually felt dizzy at one point at the thought of like looking down on everything.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's tricky sometimes to write about space and writing those
Yeah.
moments because it's like you can very easily fall into cliches of like we're all specks of dust in the universe
Yeah.
and all of that. So it was interesting to try and write them as like realistically as possible,
Hmm.
and especially with Ollie, who's he's quite a down to earth guy, and yeah, and it is scary, isn't it?
Terrifying.
It's
Yeah.
it's so scary. So yeah, trying to write them in a way that, was romantic in some sense, but also didn't kind of hide from the fact of how scary it would be. And it was kind of fun. I'd never written a scene like that before. So
Yeah, I
a
mean,
nice kind of challenge.
it's overwhelming to even think about. I really want to talk about Ollie's parents because I think they give you a great insight into Ollie, and I especially loved his mum. I thought she was such a beautiful character. So, firstly, could you tell the listeners the French saying on jam that his mother reassures him with? Because I really loved this.
Oh, yeah. So there is a saying in French which Ollie's mom tells Ollie when he's thinking about, he's struggling at university, which is Le savoir, c'est comme la confiture. Moins on en a, plus on l'étale. So, which in English is knowledge is like jam. The less you have, the more you spread it.
Yeah.
And which I think is true in some ways,
Yeah.
you
Yeah, I think
it's
it's such a beautiful sentiment, and I really needed to read that because I'm constantly, feeling like an imposter and feeling like I'm not intelligent enough. I come from like a working class background, so I often think, oh, I'm not intelligent enough to be in these spaces, especially when it comes to like the arts. It feels like, oh, I don't belong there. So that aspect of the book really resonated with me because I was like, I totally get how he's feeling in that moment, and his mum just says the most perfect, beautiful thing. She just plucks it out of nowhere. But I want to ask a little bit about his dynamic with his parents because obviously we do see him from childhood into his adulthood, and we see all these beautiful memories that he has with his parents, but we also see later in life him kind of reckoning with his parents aging and the potential of them getting ill, which is something that is so terrifying for us to comprehend, but we all have to think about at some point. So, could you tell us a little bit about their dynamic and that sort of shift that they have?
So part one is very much us in Ollie's childhood and him spending lots of time in his garden and his kind of like, idyllic English village. And we get to see his, yeah, as you said, he's very close to his mom,
Mhm.
again, being an only child, kind of like a lonely kid. I think that bond, it was very important to establish that bond he has with his
Yeah,
mom and his dad as well. His dad is kind of a man of his time, quite a stoic man, a bit strict, but not like a horrible dad by any means. But I think there's a kind of awkwardness between him and Ollie, which is, I think, again, explains some of Ollie's behavior later in life and that idea that he's always keen to please and,
yeah,
his relation with Mark Macy, a character that you meet later, Ollie's boss as well. I think the idea was that it was almost like kind of replicated in some ways because that idea of always, yeah, wanting to be kind of a good person and wanting to be kind of top of his classes and also with one of his professors at university as well. And I think it was important to establish those relationships and then in order to kind of show everything that he loses later in life, Ollie, when he goes on this mission. And I think I'm at that age as well where a lot of my friends and me as well, we're seeing our parents get a bit older or like retire and all these things. And it's hard and your relationship changes so much from seeing them as those kind of like strong, perfect beings and then
yeah,
seeing all their flaws and weaknesses come to life. And Ollie definitely struggles with that as well
mm,
and trying to keep it spoiler free. But there is a
yeah,
lot of guilt. I think guilt is an emotion that he really has to reckon with a lot of his time during his career, whether in the Navy or as an astronaut, because he misses so much and he's not there for so much of that kind of later part in
mm,
life, and he misses so much of that relationship you establish with your parents when you're both adults as well,
yeah.
which is a very important one in lots of ways. And he feels regretful, I think, in some ways about not being there for that. And I think there's this bit in the book where he sees that a lot of our lives is just the process of having to let go of things, and whether it be values or your childhood or your memories or your parents in some ways, we have to let go of them in order to grow as people. And he struggles with that.
Yeah, understandably so. I think we do think our parents are invincible, and I think we'd much prefer a life in which they were, but it's just not the way life works. So yeah, I think it's another reason why I don't think I could go away for the length of time that he does. But I do understand Ollie's reasons for going. I think we should get into Philly because I loved her, and I think she's a great character, and she's someone that is his childhood friend who he spends this sort of summer with, and then he bumps into her later in life and they have a relationship and he ends up marrying her. I just love it if you could tell us about creating Philly and their sort of life together.
Yeah, so Philly was quite a nice character to write because she presents a kind of contrast to Ollie. She's a
Yeah.
biologist. She's someone who's known Ollie since he was a child. And as they grow up, Ollie is someone who's always interested in those big ideas and those great things and the universe, whereas she's more interested in earthly things and the small, living
Hmm.
beings and the kind of minute things in life. And so that, yeah, she provides a nice kind of contrast to Ollie. And it was very important for me to show that our ambitions and the decisions we make kind of don't only exist within a vacuum, but within
Yeah.
a kind of bigger context of the people who surround you, and they do have a ripple effect. And showing that Ollie's decisions also affect her, and she also has to sacrifice a lot in order for Ollie to achieve, his goals and his dreams.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that she's known Ollie since he was a child and that they have this kind of such strong groundings to their relationship, this
Hmm.
strong kind of foundation is both great and it's what I think creates such a strong bond between them. But I think a lot of the time as well, you get this feeling that a lot of their relationship is based on memories. And for Ollie, having, as we said, Ollie, someone who likes to move forward and at 18 wanted this kind of blank slate and is always in some ways reinventing himself and trying to figure out who he is, and having as a partner someone who knows him so much and who knows him since he was a child is both reassuring, but I think is sometimes something that he struggles with as well because he's a shapeshifter in some ways, and so it was interesting writing that kind of tension between them as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I really felt for her because when he goes away, she's left with the child, she's has to solo parent and she has to kind of move around for his work and there's a lot of sacrifices that she has to make for him. And I don't know if he necessarily considers the sacrifices that she's making until she kind of pulls him up on it and says, I've been making these sacrifices and now you want to do the biggest thing, which is to leave us for 10 years. How do you think that's going to make me feel? I wondered how you kind of if you landed on who was in the right in terms of that argument that they have about, she doesn't want him to go on this 10-year mission, but he obviously does. Did you feel that one of them was more right than the other, or as the writer of both of them, did you have to find empathy on both sides?
I think I did have to find empathy on both sides, but I think you can't say Philly's wrong there. Like
No,
I would
she's
be I
not.
would be pissed off if my husband, father of my child did this. So, but I think she also says that the things that made her fall in love with Ollie is also the things that make him the perfect man for this mission. And
Yeah.
she acknowledged that in some ways. And I think that's something that people often say, like the things you love about your partner is what's going to drive you crazy about them as well.
Mhm.
Like it's going to really annoy you, like, 20 years down the line. And I think Ollie, by the end, kind of, he knows that she, doesn't have to forgive him. And he understands kind of that the decision he's made means that it's kind of ruined his family in some ways and his family life. But he also, I think, admits that he doesn't know if he would do it any differently if
Mhm.
he had to restart over again, because he knows that who he is as a person is someone who would, like, I think there's this great line in Past Lives, the movie, which I was by Celine Song, which is like at the end, her childhood friend, I forget the name, but it kind of says like, in life there are people who stay and people who leave, and there's someone who leaves, and that's one of the reasons why he's attracted to her as well. And I think there's
Yeah.
something a bit like that with Ollie. He's someone who kind of would do this mission and someone who would leave in some ways. And I don't know if it's even a thing of like being right or wrong. I think it's just kind of who they both are.
Yeah. It's a bit more complex
And
than that.
but I think, yeah, Philly is definitely not wrong. There's
No,
been
she's
noise.
she's really not. She's really not. And the person that is driving him to, make these choices is his boss, Mark, who you briefly mentioned before. He is this kind of greedy billionaire, tech obsessed. Wasn't inspired by anyone, was he?
I think I did want him to feel like his own person.
Yeah, of course,
Um,
yeah.
Especially just because like it's so like a lot of the billionaires, whether like Musk or Branson or Richard or Jeff Bezos, like they're still like they have this kind of like cartoonish villain side to them.
Yeah.
And they also like changed so much. Like their trajectory in the past 10 years has changed so much. So in a weird way, I wanted Mark to feel more like a real person, more grounded. And so he is of course like kind of inspired by, a lot of the kind of space billionaires of today. But I did want him as well to be like his own person.
Yeah, fair, fair. I mean, I didn't like him, but I don't think that will come as a surprise to you. I want to ask you a sort of bookish question about your novel, which is that when Oliver is working in the Navy in his 20s, he talks about being on the submarine and finally getting around to reading the books he's been meaning to read for years. And I wondered if you were him in this scenario, what books have you been meaning to get to for years that you would be reading?
Oh my God, so many. I mean, in a way, this is what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to read like all the classics. I mean, I really want to read Middlemarch,
Me too.
which was just elected like the best
Yeah.
book by The Guardian. So definitely that. I want to read Les Miserables by Victor Hugo as well, which I haven't read yet. I haven't, at school, I grew up in France. I read lots of French classics, but I've never read that one. So I would start with these two for now.
For now.
Yeah.
I love when he returns from the mission and he sees the books on the shelf at Philly's and he sees, he's listing off like, oh, there's authors that I love, but I don't recognize the titles, and it's like Murakami and Rooney, and like I just loved that so much because I was like, oh my God, the books, you'd miss so many books.
Yeah, you like so much pop culture that you just
Yeah.
miss out on. Yeah.
And Mark says to him, doesn't he? He's like, go and cut, because he's like, what's going to happen next? And he's like, what do you mean, what's going to happen next? Go and catch up on all the film and TV that you've missed. I was like, that would be me. I'd be like sprinting to the cinema. And I think finally, I want to ask, before I ask for your finishing recommendation, I do want to ask, are we getting an adaptation?
Oh, no, I wish. I don't, I mean, not yet. Maybe one day, but
There
that's,
should be.
thank you.
It's such an excellent novel, and I could really see it. I was really visualizing the scenes in my head, so I was like, I want to see this on screen at some point. So,
Thank you.
let's keep everything crossed. But you are genuinely a beautiful writer, Cecile, and I loved this book so much. I think finally, I want to ask if there's anything that you would like to recommend to the listeners.
Great question. I mean the two books I mentioned, reading are great, Martha and Margaret and The Revolutionary Road. I'm really excited about The Devoted by Catherine Cho, her debut novel, which is coming out in a few weeks as well.
That looks great.
Yeah, which is great. Otherwise, I watched this great documentary on Disney the other day called Lost in the Jungle, which is about those three siblings who got lost in, well, it was the Amazonia, but and who just kind of had to make their way out of the jungle. And I thought that was a great documentary. I think it's by the guy who did Free Solo as well. So yeah, I was like, when someone asked me for recommendations, I was blank.
Yeah, no,
Came
that's
up with
completely
anything.
fair. That's completely fair. I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of further reading or further watching, if
Mhm.
they enjoyed this novel,
Mhm.
what would you recommend? Maybe something that you watched or read
Yeah.
whilst researching or something?
Yeah, so I mean, Kazuo Shigeru was definitely a big inspiration. I just love how he creates those kind of sci-fi-ish worlds that are not quite ours, but that still remain like very grounded. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I hope anyone who's read Celestial Light would have already read, Never Let Me Go
Yeah.
and Remains of the Days and all of those works. But I also really love The Employees by Olga Ravin, which is also takes place on board a spacecraft. The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa as well is such a great book.
Which I
I
haven't
really
read,
enjoyed.
so I'm
It's
really wanting
really
to get to that this year.
great, yeah. And I really love Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel as well. So yeah, and there's this book called To the Moon and Back as well by Eliana Ramage, which came out at the same time as mine, and which is also about the first Cherokee astronaut, as well as a fiction, but which is also a great space novel.
Amazing. That's so many great recommendations for me to feast on, never mind the listeners. So thank you so much, Cecile, for joining me today and for this wonderful book. I've absolutely loved talking to you about it. And of course, I loved reading it. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's
Of
such a great
course.
chat.
And for the listeners, there are links in the show notes to both of Cecile's books. Celestial Lights is, of course, out now, and I will also pop a link in the show notes to her Instagram, so go give her a follow. For more content from us, you can find us over on Patreon, and if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, and go give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok. That is all we've got time for. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.